Hi, welcome to our free workshop, Breaking the Silence, Supporting Teens with Suicidal Thoughts. My name is Mark Bonnell. I'm a Master of Social Work intern here at Norino Murphy & Associates, and I will be your facilitator today, tonight, wherever you are as you're watching this video. This workshop's goal is to empower people like you to support teens who are experiencing suicidal thoughts. It's really designed with parents in mind. However, anyone who has a caring relationship with a teen is going to benefit from this. So whether you're a caregiver, teacher, pastor, coach, older sibling, grandparent, as long as you have a caring relationship with a teen, then this workshop's for you. It'll benefit you for sure. That all being said, in part 3, we're going to discuss some practical tips and ideas. Those are really geared for parents. So if you are not a parent, let's say you're a basketball coach or whatnot, those tips aren't going to be necessarily directly applicable for you, but the gist of it and kind of the intention behind it will be transferable to your context and whatnot. And before we dive in, I do want to highlight that we're going to talk about some heavy stuff in this workshop. As you can tell by the title, we're going to be talking about suicidal thoughts. So I have added links to local resources for San Bernardino County and LA County in the description for each video, so that if you or anyone you know is having a mental health emergency, you can have those resources and contact the people that you need to. So we've designed this workshop to be a 3-part video series. We've split it into 3 parts intentionally, and it's been designed with taking a pause in between each video in mind. Some of this is to pause and reflect, and another is just to give yourself a break, because this is heavy content. So now, just for a brief overview of the format and the content that we'll be covering, in part 1, I'm really going to be focusing on helping break the silence around suicide. It's usually a taboo topic. We don't talk about it a lot in culture. So I'm going to be talking about the language that we use. How do we talk about suicide? I'll also give a brief overview of the statistics and how often and how much this impacts teens and adolescents. And then I'm also going to talk about some common myths around suicide that we hear, and I'm going to dispel those myths. And then in part 2, we're going to dive into a prominent theory about suicide, and I'm going to talk about and explore a lot of the concepts there. So we'll be talking about stuff like pain, specifically emotional and psychological pain, hopelessness, connection, and capability. And I'll define all those terms. We'll get all into the details of that. And then we'll look at some warning signs, and I'm going to add a ton of caveats to those and extra things to consider as well. And then in part 3, we're going to talk about some practical tips. We'll talk about how to create an open and safe space where teens can feel comfortable to tell you about what's going on in their life, comfortable to tell you what they're thinking and feeling, and then also how to respond. Like, what do you do if your teen does say, like, yeah, I am thinking about maybe killing myself and doing it via XYZ, or yeah, sometimes I just wish I was better off dead. Like, how do you respond to that? We'll talk about that. We'll get into all those details. And then I'm also going to give a brief overview of the different levels of care in the mental health system, just so you can have an idea of that and it's familiar to you as well. And now the very last thing, just a quick note on why we decided to do a virtual and asynchronous format. So one of those is just to increase accessibility, so that if people had work meetings or sports practices or whatnot and they couldn't make it, they can come to this. You can view it whenever you want. Just more people can participate and get this information. The other one is that suicide is still a taboo and stigmatized topic. It's uncomfortable. So we figured, sometimes some people might not be comfortable showing up to an in-person workshop about this. And the whole goal is to break the ice. It's to make this be a topic that we can talk about. So we figured, let's do a format where any discomfort that people might be feeling doesn't have to be an obstacle. So with that, we'll transition into the content. The first part of empowering people to be able to talk about suicide and suicidal thoughts with the teens that are in their life is to be able to break that silence, is to get comfortable talking about it. So we're going to start right there. How do you even talk about this? What words do you use? What language do you use? So we'll dive in. So culturally, we do have a lot of terms that refer to suicide, but in the mental health profession, we like to be really clear and direct and pretty precise when it comes to talking about this. So for this video, I'll be using phrases like suicide attempt or attempted suicide, as well as completed suicide or died by suicide. There are lots of phrases that people may use, but it is important to always clarify and understand really what they're talking about. All right, and then so getting into the terms, the first one that we have is suicidal ideation. This really just refers to the thoughts about suicide, whether or not someone has them. Now, there's 2 types of this that we talk about. Those are called passive and active suicidal ideation. Passive is something like when someone might say, I wish that I could just disappear. Maybe I wish I would just fall asleep and not wake up. It's more of a wish for death in that sense. And then active suicidal ideation is when someone is thinking about kind of actively doing something to hurt and to kill themselves. And then next up we have plan. This one is fairly self-explanatory. It's, does someone have a plan, a thought about how they're going to go about the suicide attempt or completing the suicide? This can involve dates, locations, or an idea about how they might do it. Which brings us to means. That is referring to the process by which someone plans to or is thinking about killing themselves. So this can refer to maybe a weapon that would be used, or medications or whatnot. And then we have intent also. This is whether or not someone actually intends to go through with their plan and to die by suicide. So the point that I do want to drive home with these terms is that just because someone has ideation does not mean that they also have a plan. And then even if they have ideation and a plan, it doesn't mean that they have the means to be able to go through with this plan. And then there's still the question of whether or not they actually intend to complete it. Alright, so now we'll look at how common this is. So suicide is actually the second leading cause of death for youth ages 10 to 19. And in fact, 22%, or 1 in 5, when surveying high school students in the most recent data provided by the CDC, have seriously considered suicide. 18%, which is also approximately 1 in 5, have made a plan. And then there 10%, or approximately 1 in 10, have attempted suicide. And now moving on to dispelling some myths. The first common myth that we hear is that talking about suicide or asking if someone feels suicidal is going to encourage suicide attempts. Another way to phrase this is, I don't want to bring this up with someone because then what if I give them the idea that suicide might be an option? But in reality, it's not true. Talking about suicide provides the opportunity for open communication, and it reduces stigma. It's like this workshop. It makes it something we can talk about. This allows for some space and approves for asking for help. All right, and then the next common myth is that suicide attempts or suicides happen without any warning. And in reality, even when people survive and they say that they weren't aware of the intent, the signs just weren't recognized. There are always signs leading up, and that means that there's always something that we, as the people who are in those people's lives, can do to intervene. The next myth is that once someone is intent on suicide, there's no helping them. And that's not true. All people can be helped. In fact, people who have survived suicide attempts, and when they tell their stories and they share their experience, they often talk about looking for someone to intervene even at the last second. So all people can be helped no matter where they are in that process. The next myth is that people who threaten suicide are just seeking attention. It's just a cry for help, basically that they aren't serious. In reality, it can be a cry for help. It can be a way to get attention from someone. But often, if this is their cry for help, it is a step in the progression towards an actual attempt. There will be other risk signs, there'll be other things going on, but all threats do need to be treated as serious. And then our final myth is that the only effective intervention for suicide comes from professional psychotherapists with extensive experience. Or put another way, if I'm not a master's level or PhD level psychologist, what can I do to help with suicidal ideations? And that's not true. In reality, everyone who interacts with teens can help by way of providing emotional support and encouragement. And in fact, a lot of the interventions that we will recommend, they rely on family and friends to provide a lot of emotional and relational support to people. So I hope this introduction and overview has been useful for you. Next, in part 2, we'll explore warning signs and some useful theoretical concepts in order to help you understand the sorts of experiences that a teen with suicidal thoughts may be having. The goal is to build your understanding of the psychological dynamics of suicidal ideation in order to help you be more confident and comfortable to discuss these things with the important teens in your life. We'll see you then.